Good evening. Welcome to Reflections on Granby. My name is Mike Malloy and I'll be your host this evening. Our guest tonight is Bob Scherpf, a 72-year-old resident of Granby, resident of 134 Loomis Street, 29-year resident of Granby.
North Granby.
North Granby. Yeah, that gets dicey in this town, doesn't it? So, 29-year resident of North Granby, and he's our guest tonight. It's a pleasure to have you here, Bob.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Bob, why don't we start out, we usually try to roll through your early years and get some background of where you're from and what your history is and what you're all about. So where were you born, Bob?
I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1938.
Okay.
And went to public school there and went to the University of Nebraska. Did not graduate and had a series of post-college jobs and got hurt on one of them and went on unemployment, and the Division of Employment Security found me an interview at the local newspaper.
Oh, interesting.
And I went down and applied, and they must have been hurt for good applicants because I had no experience, and I got the job.
You rolled right into it.
Yeah, as a routines clerk, and so for the first 30 days I called hospitals, morgues, and the police department.
Okay.
To do deaths, births, and weather, and then I was a general assignment reporter, and then a city hall reporter, and then in 4 years I went into opinion writing, and I did that for 43 years.
Wow, that's quite a consistent run. Okay, just before we just rolled through your early years in about 3 minutes there, so why don't we back up? Well, you were born in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Yeah.
In 1939. 1938, sorry. Mm-hmm. And what's your earliest memory of Lincoln? Do you?
Well, it's probably my mother and her parents, my grandparents, during World War II. We lived with them in a lovely old house while my dad was in the South Pacific.
Okay.
And
so he was in World War II.
He was. Yeah, he was in the Army Ordnance.
Okay.
And we lived with my grandparents, and so I have memories of that house. Probably my first memories. I have memories of my grandfather taking me downtown for the celebration on VE Day, for example.
Okay.
I remember the sadness in our home when President Roosevelt died. I remembered my first memories of my father, him coming home from the Philippines in August of 1945.
Okay, yeah. So he would have missed some of you would have missed him during your early years at that point. Yeah. So that you went to school in Lincoln. What was that? What was that like?
Well, they had wonderful schools.
Did
and,
they?
Yeah, terrific schools, and it was. I don't know. It was just kind of a golden time.
Post-war.
Yeah, I enjoyed. Well, I started in probably 1943 or so when I was 5 in kindergarten.
Okay. Yeah.
And
so they had kindergarten.
They did, and they had junior high, 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, and we had a 3-year high school. Right. And I went to the oldest and biggest high school in town, Lincoln High, which had about 1,800 or 1,900 students.
So it's a pretty good sized school.
Yeah.
So Lincoln's a pretty good sized town at that point.
Lincoln at that point was probably 88 or 90,000.
Okay.
Maybe a little bigger. It's now 240,000.
Oh, okay. But for that day, it was a fairly substantial size. It was a city.
Yeah, it was a city, small city.
What was the primary industry and activity in?
It's a government town and a university town.
It's the capital.
It's the capital and the county seat. So there was state government, county government, city government. It had some homegrown insurance companies.
Okay.
There were and are ag-related industries in Lincoln or around Lincoln. There's also a manufacturing plant, Kawasaki, and they're making the big new M8 train cars that are going on the New Haven line.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
They'll be making over 300 of them.
So it's a subsidiary of the Japanese company?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. Wow. So it sounds like they had a fairly diverse kind of...
Yeah, Kawasaki wasn't there then.
No,
that's probably the last 20 years. But there was light manufacturing there, I think, as I was growing up. I wasn't paying too much attention to that. But was also a railroad town. There was a huge switching yard, still is, west of Lincoln.
Okay.
And there was the reason that I'm from Lincoln is that my grandfather, my mother's father, was a railroad man.
Okay.
From Michigan, Canada, and then Michigan. And he got a job with the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, running the repair and maintenance roundhouse in Havelock, Nebraska, which is right next to Lincoln.
Okay.
And came out there in 1904.
Wow. When the railroads were in their heyday, really.
Yeah. He was an expert on steam engines, and he concluded his career as a consultant at the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia.
Oh, interesting.
And then retired in the late 20s.
So what did your dad do when he came back from the military?
He got into his family's business, which was livestock and grain. He and his father and brother-in-law would go out to small farms around Lincoln and buy cattle or hogs or horses, and in the case of cattle, they'd fatten them up and take them to the slaughterhouses in Omaha.
Really? So they had So was it as a farm, or just
they had an acreage. They had an acreage with a big barn and a big corral and pens for different kinds of animals. And
right.
It was right in town.
So it was more of a commercial endeavor than like a livestock farm. I know nothing about this, so. It
was a small. They were traders, basically. They'd go out and they'd get some yearlings and they'd take them to their acreage and they'd fatten them up and then they'd truck them to Omaha and they would be sold for slaughter. They also raised and cut corn for the university's agriculture school, and they were just sort of farm people. And except my dad had a college degree.
Interesting. So your mom stayed at home?
Did my mother stay at home? She has a college degree. She's still living. She'll be 99 in November. She has a college degree, but she worked for the Resettlement Bureau, which was a New Deal bureau after she graduated. And then she got married, and I was born, and my father went into the service. And after the war, they had two more children, my two sisters. Okay. And my mother was a housewife until the mid-50s, and then she went to work for a small clinic of pediatricians, and she was an office manager and did the records and was the receptionist and did a whole bunch of stuff. She worked for them for over 20 years.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you graduated school from?
Well, I graduated from Lincoln High School in 1956. Okay. I went to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. I think probably my fraternity was more important to me than getting a degree. Okay. But anyway,
just for the connections, or just because you were having fun?
Just because I enjoyed it and I wasn't serious, yeah. Okay. And although I was enrolled in the College of Arts and Sciences, and I was a political science major.
Okay.
And I minored in history and English. I took a lot of philosophy. I took, you had to have a language, there was a language requirement. I took 4 semesters of German.
Okay.
Very bad at languages, but I muddled through.
So you got somewhat of a diverse experience there. I mean,
It was
between
the
the fraternity
diverse.
and the classes.
Yeah, it was diverse is not the word I would use, but
No?
that's what the phrase misspent youth is
It's all
meant
about.
for.
Yeah,
So anyway, I did compile a lot of hours, but I was there a long time. I was there the better part of 7 years.
Really?
Yeah, and I had 1 year of law school, but
Okay.
we don't talk about that.
Okay.
I still have 14 hours to get a degree.
So you never
but
quite.
Never quite closed the deal. I got a job at the newspaper in the meantime. I mean, I had so many. I puddled cement. I tended bar. I tested grain. I worked as a field hand for a materials consulting firm. I worked for the State Department of Roads on a survey crew that helped plot the route of Interstate 80 going
Really?
through Nebraska.
So you were filling in the gaps quite a bit through those years.
I
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
and then I got a job as mowing weeds around billboards for an outdoor advertising company,
Okay.
Stoner Outdoor Advertising, and that's when I got hurt and went on unemployment, and then got the job at the newspaper. If I wouldn't have got hurt that fall, I don't know what would have happened to me, because the newspaper business and I hit it off real good.
How old were you at that point? When did you start working for about what age?
I
did you-
started working for the newspaper in November of 1964, so I would have been 26.
Okay. Now you mentioned that at one point you did a little basic training in the National Guard. How
Well,
old?
that was about a year earlier, a year or two earlier.
So the draft was still going on.
Yeah, and
Some-
there was a what was it, 61? I forget the exact year. There was a crisis, and a lot of people were running to Guard units who didn't want to be drafted, thought they would be drafted.
Right.
I was a person who went to the Guard unit and was sent to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio for basic training, which I really sort of enjoyed.
Did you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did. I enjoyed my brief service career. As it turned out, I had to have a back operation shortly after I got back from basic training, and
Okay.
so I got a honorable medical discharge.
So in some ways, some medical accidents or some accidents have steered your career.
In a way.
Interesting.
In a way,
Yeah.
although I think, well, yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm not sure which way the back operation would have steered me.
Right.
Had I not had it, I still would have had a guard obligation.
Right. Right. So you didn't have
Yeah.
to fulfill that after the.
No, I
Okay.
didn't.
Okay. So you're working for which paper? Which was the paper?
Well, there were 2 papers in Lincoln. It was during, that was that era was kind of a newspaper heyday, and towns like Lincoln of by then 150,000 maybe, I don't know,
Right.
still had 2 newspapers,
Right.
separately owned and jointly published. I worked for a chain-owned newspaper, the Lincoln Star, which was the morning paper and the smaller of the 2.
Right.
Ended up the bigger of the 2, but then for many years it was the smaller of the 2. It was owned by Lee Enterprise of Davenport, Iowa,
Okay.
and they still own the Journal-Star newspaper, which is the successor newspaper to the 2.
Oh, interesting.
And they're a medium-sized newspaper chain that owns the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, among other papers, and
Not a lot of those left, are there?
There aren't. Well, there are still the companies. The industry is not in great shape, but
Right.
Nor is Lee in great shape. Their stock now is worth pennies, so they've got some scrambling to do.
The standard saga for the print industry the last few years.
Yeah.
So okay, so you obviously met with some success in that career because you said you're 40. How many years did you write? Have you written?
Well, 64 as a full-time
Okay.
journalist. November of 1964 to the end of September 2007.
So 43 years, but you still continue to do.
I do.
Yeah. Okay.
I do. I'm a freelance editorial writer, but as a practical matter, what I write appears in the Current and no other paper.
Okay. So you were in Omaha doing your
Lincoln.
I'm sorry. You know, the insurance. That's what you threw me with.
Yeah.
That's what stuck in my head.
Yeah.
But you're in Lincoln and you're doing your newspaper beginnings, and how did you leave Lincoln?
Well, I loved and still love Lincoln and have many friends there, and I love my job there. I ended up as editorial page editor, and in 1981, I took a trip with the National Conference of Editorial Writers. That was back in the day where those organizations sponsored foreign trips, and your newspaper paid for them.
Wow.
And
Good gig in the day.
So there was a trip to the Middle East, and that subject matter really interested me.
Okay.
And it was to Israel and Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt.
Wow.
And so I went on that trip. We were gone for over a month. We were supposed to meet with the leaders of all those countries, and including, it was a group of editorial editors.
Right.
From a number of papers. I think there were 15 of us, and a couple of television journalists, and the rest of us newspaper people. We had an appointment with the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, who was assassinated just before we got there. And,
Okay. So it was turbulent times.
it was turbulent times. It was
Not that it's ever.
It was an event that deeply saddened me because he was a very interesting person.
Yeah.
And at any rate, we met a lot of interesting characters, spent several hours with, for instance, Yasser Arafat, spent several hours with people in Israel.
Okay.
Not Mr. Begin, who was prime minister at the time. He was mad at President Reagan, so he wouldn't meet with Americans, but did meet Yitzhak Shamir, who became prime minister.
Interesting.
Yeah, and people like that.
So you got exposed to quite the...
Oh, I did, and the reason I mentioned that trip is because the man who organized it for NCEW, the Editorial Writers Organization, was John Zakarian. And John had been president of NCEW and had worked for newspapers in Illinois and in Boston, and was on the editorial board of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and then was hired to take over the editorial page at the Hartford Courant.
Okay.
And he's a native of Jerusalem and an Arabic speaker, knew the area, and so was perfect to line up.
He's the guy to send.
Stops.
Yeah.
He was the guy to organize for us.
Yeah.
I met him. He liked the work that I did because we sent our stuff, exchanged our stuff with all the people on the trip.
Right.
And the next year he had an opening, and he offered me the job here, and I came back to work for him.
So you went right from Lincoln to Hartford?
Hartford, yeah.
Okay. Is that common in your industry, or do people jump around more than that?
Well, people, I did not jump around.
Right.
I worked 18 years for one newspaper and 25 years for
Right, that's what I
another
mean.
one. Some people, I guess maybe I'm easily satisfied. I don't know. I enjoyed
Consistent.
I enjoyed working in my hometown. I
Yeah.
enjoyed Connecticut and working at the Current. I loved where I lived, and so I never sought to go elsewhere.
Okay, so you come to Connecticut, and you're secured employment at the Hartford Current, and which was a pretty big jump for you. I mean, it had to have taken a little bit of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And you came, and how did you move right to Granby? Yeah.
Well, John said, what are you going to do for housing? You're going to rent? You're going to buy? I said I was thinking about buying it. He said, well, why don't you use this person who I've recommended as a real estate person for
Right.
other people who've come.
Right.
So I talked to this lady, and I told her that I didn't know anything about Connecticut. I'd been in New England before, but I didn't know anything about Connecticut.
Right.
I had a dream. I wanted to live in the countryside in New England,
Right.
and so the first place she took me was West Hartford, and I said,
Well, it's an easy commute.
well, it is, and
Yeah.
and I said, this is like a Lincoln residential neighborhood, because
Right.
Lincoln's very nice too.
Not exactly what you had in mind
But this
for
is what I had
quintessential.
in mind. So we kind of edged out. We went to Unionville, and then one day we went out to Hebron, and I wasn't biting on anything she was showing me, and she finally said, well, I'm going to take you to this place out in Granby, but it's too far.
Right.
And so she drove me out to 134 Loomis Street, North Granby, and we pulled into the driveway, and it was a crushed rock driveway with lined by beautiful Norway pines. And
Okay.
it's it was a nice little cape, and it was kind of a Joseph Smith moment, this is the place.
Right,
I
right.
Didn't even get inside, but then she
Was there
showed
any
me.
shimmering rainbow over it?
Well,
Nothing quite- yeah,
yes,
yeah,
there
no.
might as well have been, because I fell in love with it immediately,
Right.
and went inside, and we sat and talked, and decided to give the owner an offer.
Okay.
And immediately, and the owner was Arlene Mooney, who was the probate judge here. Judge Mooney just died in January. She was became a wonderful friend of mine,
Okay.
and I bought her the home she grew up in, basically,
Right.
and still live there. And then 5 years ago or so, I think it was about 5, maybe a little longer, I bought another about 11 acres right around that
Oh, okay.
2-acre plot that I first bought from her. I bought those 11 acres from her.
So you have a little farmstead yourself?
So I
now,
have
yeah.
about 13 acres there. Anyway, she and her listing agent, Bill Vibert, were the first people I met in Granby, and are my oldest friends in Granby. I mean, Arlene's gone now, but Bill and Pat are good friends. And
Okay. Other than obviously you had a New England flair when you drove into town, what was the impression you had when you first came through Granby? What was?
I
Obviously-
worried about memorizing the route. I thought
Yeah.
it was beautiful. I couldn't believe how lucky I was
Okay.
to have found a place like that.
North Granby, I'm sorry.
Well, I tell you, when you come up from the town center, which is nice enough,
Yeah.
and you go by the cemetery,
beautiful.
and the town buildings were built then, Tudor Holcomb's legacy, and but when you pull up there and you start to turn right down 189 toward Granville, it's a beautiful, and you look past that little church that's a
Right.
preschool now.
Yeah,
What
right,
a beautiful sight that is.
You could be in the middle of Vermont when you get up that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
really
was
is
like
nice.
that. Then when you get down into almost to the Cossett Library, not quite.
Okay.
There's another gorgeous view. That whole area there, where 189 crosses East Street and Mountain Road, and the post office and the library and the cider mill and the hills behind the Hemingway's house.
Right.
Just gorgeous.
So it was basically the environment, the surroundings that
yes, yeah, and it hasn't changed all that much.
No.
I mean, Granby and certain areas of North Granby have changed. There's been a lot of building, but I don't notice it so much where I am.
Right.
I try to remember when the Heather Lane homes went in. I think some of them must have been built after I came to town. But
right.
anyway, I felt very lucky. I thought it was a very beautiful place to live, and still do.
It's turned out quite well for you.
Yeah.
Is there anything, I mean, in the time that you've been here, is there anything that's changed that strikes you? Is there anything, what's the biggest change, I guess I should,
well, when I got here, I think Granby was 7,500 to 8,000. Now it's what, 11,000?
Population.
Yeah. So there has been a lot of growth, but it doesn't intrude all that much on your sense of a rural place.
Yeah.
I think it's a well-planned town. I think probably, although I don't know this because I don't have children in the school system, I think probably the schools are really better. Probably much better than they were when I first came here. Maybe that's when the schools were starting to get better. It's just from what I've heard.
Seems to be the impression,
yeah. And I think town government taxes are a little high, but considering what you get,
right.
They're not that high, and I think town government is very competent. I think they deliver great services.
So you're pretty satisfied homeowner.
Well, I am.
Yeah.
I mean, let's see. I'm still paying on my mortgage. And when I no longer have freelance income, it may be a stretch. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. But your experience now. Is there anything if you were to tell somebody, a friend who's never been here, you were to describe Granby, how would you do that?
Well, I'd say it's that's what I've said. I'd say it's a beautiful place with good schools and friendly people and good town services, and it's an ideal place to live.
Perfect.
What does it look like? It's hilly and forested and
looks like New England the way
rushing streams and yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to see in the town, or any change? The way I usually phrase this, if you had a magic wand and you could do one thing for Granby, and regardless of cost or upkeep or anything, what would that be?
I want the laundromat to come back.
A laundromat? Wow.
Yeah, I mean.
You miss the laundromat.
I do miss the laundromat. Yeah.
Okay.
I've had to search far and wide for a wash, dry, and fold place.
Okay. A drop off and pick up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Full service.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one thing that's missing here. There are some good eating experiences. I'd like to see a fine dining place stay.
Okay.
Last, be successful. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, when I go to Hartford, I drive, but I could take a bus.
Right.
So that's available to me if I get up early enough.
This is pretty much the outer perimeter of the bus route.
Yeah.
That North Granby stop there.
Right.
So.
I don't know what else to say. It's just a pretty nice town.
Any characters in town that strike you that you remember, other than the folks that you mentioned, the home? Anybody that you remember?
It's for the first and the longest time. Granby was my bedroom, and I worked and played in Hartford and elsewhere. So
very involved.
Didn't have children in the schools, so it took a long time to make a lot of friends.
Right.
And I mean, I can't say now I have a lot of friends, but I have, since I retired, many more friends.
Right.
And I met a lot of people through Arlene.
Okay.
And then I met people through the people I met through Arlene. You know, Paul and Whitey Johnson, who I think I met through Arlene, introduced me to other people, and the Haslans and the Mains, and you know.
But you're right. I mean, unless you have kids in the school system, it takes a while to develop those social connections, because that forces
it does.
you to.
And then when I semi-retired, I got on the board of the Salmon Brook Historical Society, which I really, really enjoyed, except that, you know, I need to do something for the Historical Society, but I'd have to go to work.
Right.
And because the freelance schedule, it's when I'm needed, not when I want to go in.
Right.
You know? And sometimes those two aren't the same.
You're on call.
And but being on the board, I met a lot of people. I was fortunate enough to be president of the board, immediate past president. Folks that I know from the Historical Society are fine people, and I'm glad I know them, and they're friends of mine.
So civic type involvement creates quite a social connection.
Well,
too.
it does, and I got to know some town hall folks and others. Paula Johnson asked me to be on a scenic roads subcommittee a few years ago, so I did that. That was really my first kind of toe in the water of civic involvement. It's while I was still a full-time employee of the paper, but that was fun, and I enjoyed it. And
what was that now? A
scenic roads subcommittee.
And what was?
Well, we did. We had held hearings, and we studied, and we, I think, if I recall correctly, recommended a scenic roads ordinance.
Okay.
For Granby.
Okay.
And it's in force, and I think there are, I wonder, Peck Orchard may be one, Lost Acres may be one, parts of them.
So
there are other areas.
What were the parameters of what you were defining in that?
Oh, I can't really remember.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
It's what qualified to be a scenic road, and it's the things that a landowner should do voluntarily to.
So recommendations to maintain the scenic route.
Yeah.
In some way.
Don't tear down your colonial era rock wall. You know,
don't
just
put 50 pink flamingos.
Right. That's right. That kind of stuff. Anyway, that was fun. Last couple of years or so, I've been a member of the Hampstead Hill Club, which is kind of fun.
What's that?
It's a little swim club in West Granby.
Okay.
That's been around a long time.
Okay.
And they have great parties.
A swim club?
Yeah.
They have a pool?
They have
I don't need to sound surprised.
Well, they have it's a swimming hole. It's
okay. Outside.
Outside.
Okay.
And they have a very nice clubhouse. And,
good.
And anyway.
Interesting.
Very nice. It's a big log clubhouse with a big fireplace.
So this must go back a few years when.
I've only been a member for a short time, but it's 20s or 30s.
Okay. Yeah.
I think.
You know, a lot of people used to come to Granby, Heartland, East Granby in the summer.
Yes.
There's a theme there.
This is where this started. With West Hartford folks.
Right.
Anyway, I mention that simply because it was a way to meet more people. And,
Yeah.
and although most of them are much younger than I am.
Well, you're coloring in our picture of Granby quite nicely here.
And,
going through that.
and I did until it conflicted with my work hours. I belonged to the Granby Camera Club.
Okay.
Um,
That's a pretty active group, isn't it?
They're very
Yeah.
active. Yeah, they're a lot better with a camera than I am.
Okay.
But as far as I know, it's still active.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so you any other thoughts or memories or stories about Granby before I wanted to ask you a few questions about your newspaper career there.
No,
It's okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, you wrote editorials for many years through quite a quite a wide swath of history here in many ways. And you've started what year did you start in Lincoln, you said?
Well, I started writing editorials in Lincoln in 1969 and did in Lincoln through until August of 1982, and then I came east.
So you started like in the Woodstock Vietnam War era, and you've gone all the way up, and you're still writing editorial opinion pieces. So what is there any memories from that span of time that you find yourself repeating off, and any experiences? I mean, the trip to the Middle East sounds like it was quite memorable.
Well, I took two trips that were. I've taken actually. I've taken a number of trips abroad, but for NCEW and for my work was that month-long trip to the Middle East, and then I got the time from John. Although I paid for the trip, I took a trip with NCEW to Eastern Europe the spring after the wall fell.
Wow.
So that would have been 1990, I think. And it was when, democracy had just come to the old Soviet client states. And
Right.
We were in Berlin when they were, dismantling all the checkpoints and getting ready for reunification later,
Right.
A year later, and a lot of the Democratic parties were springing up, and we were in Romania for their first free elections, and unfortunately they voted in people who had just changed their party name, like from Communist Party of Romania to the Free and Independent Party of but even they came along in successive elections and became more democratic. We were in, as I said, Germany, Czechoslovakia, which then split later, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and we went to Moscow, and I think Yeltsin had already come to power.
Gorbachev
then.
was gone.
I think he was. No, that isn't quite right. No. All I remember seeing, though, is their red, white, and blue banner on the Russian Parliament building near Red Square. The empire was dissolving when we were there. There was no question about it. And times were bad. I remember looking inside a grocery store and seeing, empty freezer cases and maybe a few meatless ham hocks and some scrawny beets. And
well, you were traveling through an area where, for all intents and purposes, it was a post-war reconstruction.
Yeah.
I mean,
really
without the bombs, really.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was dissolving. So. Now, what you've met a lot of interest. A couple of things that I wanted to just bring up real quickly. How many presidential conventions have you attended?
Well, being an eyewitness to history, who called it that, Murrow or somebody?
Okay. We'll give you
Even
credit.
working for a small newspaper in the Middle West, and you know, not being a TV anchor, you know, you see some pretty interesting stuff.
I can imagine, yeah.
And sometimes I feel like Zelig, you know.
Yeah, just popping up.
Yeah.
There's Bob.
Yeah, yeah. I went to 10 presidential nominating conventions. I started with the Nixon-Agnew renomination in Miami in 1972. So I've seen 6 Republican conventions and 4 Democratic conventions.
Of those conventions, what would you say? I mean, accounting for age and the amazement of youth. I mean, you're there. What was the most impressive convention? I mean, that's a loaded question, I guess, in some ways. But
Well, it is because I think the most amazing one would have been in Denver in 2008, and I didn't see that one.
okay,
But the one that was, I guess, that had the highest emotional content that I was at was the New York convention when Teddy Kennedy gave his "The Dream Will Never Die" speech, you know, as
Okay.
he was bowing out.
right.
And that would have been 1980.
No, that was the last real arm-twisting convention, wasn't it? I mean, that was like where there was really a battle going in.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much of a battle that was.
okay.
The real battle was a Kansas City convention in 1976 when Reagan and President Ford were going toe-to-toe, and Reagan was challenging him even though he was the sitting Republican president.
Right.
And came, I don't know, what, 40, 50 delegates short, something
Okay.
like that. But he really contested it. That was an interesting convention.
A lot of favors being curried.
Yeah.
So,
Then I've had a seat, kind of in a reserved area for 4 inaugurations.
wow, including the last one.
Including the last one. I went to George Herbert Walker Bush's inauguration, and I went to Clinton's first, and George W. Bush's first, and Barack Obama's first.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions I could ask you about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That I hesitate to ask. I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been like you said, you've been on the right, looking up at history right in your face for the last 40 years.
Yeah, that isn't to say, you know, I've over the years written more than my share of city hall editorials,
Right. Local.
and state government stuff, which is our bread and butter. You know, the Middle East is not our bread and butter.
Right.
It used to be that newspapers the size of the 2 that I worked for would write about the full gamut of
Right.
subject matter, and we still do at the Current, I think, but not as much.
Right.
Because you know people are interested in what you think locally.
Right.
And I can understand that.
It's more the role of the paper now, isn't
Yeah,
it? I mean,
it is.
They're referring.
Yeah, I still, and I pay for it. It's on my dime. I still go every year to Washington because I can, as a retired status member of NCW, I can get in on their briefings at the U.S. State Department.
Right.
And you know, ask Hillary questions and Condoleezza and whoever.
Yeah, so you still have the exposure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I still do that.
Okay.
I've been to a couple of gridiron dinners, which are hilarious. And
It's set to be a comic night, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's the whole idea of it,
yeah,
right? To lighten it up.
It's
The gridiron.
Just
so that
the White
gridiron, I just want
House.
to explain to the gridiron dinner is a yearly journalist kind of almost roast, isn't it?
It's a club made up of basically White House reporters. Now
Okay.
there are two other organizations that are larger but not as old.
Okay.
That hold annual dinners, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and then there's one other.
Right.
Gridiron, but they allow cameras. The Gridiron doesn't allow cameras.
And they bring in like usually the president's there.
Usually the president's there. He comes in after the Marine Band comes in.
Okay.
And
quite some pomp and circumstance.
oh yeah, the Marine Band does a little concert, and then the head table is filled up with the president and his wife and the vice president and the chief justice and the.
Now the president usually
all
makes a
that.
funny speech. Is the kind of the centerpiece?
Well,
is
it's not quite that way.
No, okay.
There are a bunch of skits.
Okay.
And then there's a Republican response and a Democratic response.
Okay.
Now, the first year I was there, the Republican response was given by Lynn Cheney, who's very smart.
Yeah.
And actually funnier than I thought.
Okay. So.
And the Democratic response was given by Senator Barack Obama.
Okay.
Who's, in my book, unbelievably talented.
Right.
He told some funny jokes. He sang a song. He was just
Really?
entertaining.
He actually sang a
Yeah, yeah, he did.
Which wasn't taped.
No, well, it
is a
wasn't.
bummer.
Wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't
Yeah,
taped.
yeah.
And then the president, as I recall, there's a toast to the president at the end. The president gives remarks, but not really lengthy remarks.
Right.
And then he is toasted, and then you go back outside to the
Right.
other bars that are parties that are going on.
Right. It's fun.
It was the Gridiron Dinner was created in the 1880s as one time during the year when the politicians and the press were supposed to treat each other with respect and have fun and get along.
Right. Right. Be more of a fraternity than a.
Yeah.
Okay. So. I'm just going to throw a couple quick questions at you, and you can answer them anyway. You've been exposed to a lot of fairly powerful people over the years. Who's the most impressive person you ever met?
Gee.
That's I just.
Oh,
probably,
there's just so many of them.
Yeah. That's almost a childish question. So feel free to
there's
digress.
I mean, there are powerful people. There are very smart people. There are people who are both powerful and smart.
Right.
I mean, I remember as a 10-year-old kid in Lincoln shinnying up a light pole and watching Harry give a speech on a whistle-top
Harry Truman.
train, and so that's how far back my memory goes.
Right.
Goes to that, and I was interested in politics as a kid that young. It's really hard to say. I have to say that for sheer ability, although the book is by far from being written and closed, Obama is a singularly impressive person in my book.
Is he?
Yeah. But there have been so many.
So much of it is context.
It is context. Yeah.
Which makes it very difficult question.
Mm-hmm. I think Connecticut has been well served.
Do you?
For the most part.
Yeah.
By. Although it's such a sour time, everybody, if you mention a Democrat, the Republicans hiss, and vice versa.
Right.
I always thought, still do think that Lowell Weicker was a really able and courageous politician, did things he needed to do.
Yeah.
I think for all his faults, John Rowland had some ability
Yeah.
as an executive.
That's what many people say.
Yeah, I think that's so.
It's getting a little bit away from the personality. What you were going to
Yeah.
say something? Feel free.
Well, no, I'm just kind of amazed at Malloy,
Yeah.
the governor.
Yeah. Not me.
I mean, there's a man with a plan, and he's not afraid to execute. Now we just see
Yeah.
how it comes out.
That book's just, the ink hasn't dried on that point yet. Yeah. It's definitely barreling through some gates that haven't been barreled through in a while.
Yeah.
Getting away from the personalities of your experience, what events, which events were the most challenging for you to write about?
Challenging, or
Yeah, or inspiring, or
yeah.
I guess those are two very different.
Well,
Memorable.
some of the writing campaigns that I waged editorially in Lincoln before I left there,
Okay.
that were locally meaningful.
Okay.
Rerouting a major roads project, changing the way of electing city council members.
Okay.
That kind of stuff.
Right.
Got people really involved and
Did it?
yeah, and interested. When I came here, we carried on a campaign for a state income tax, and still have people mad at us for that, just like they're mad at Weicker.
Yeah.
But the year 1991, wasn't that the year? His first year as Weicker's first year as governor. I think that's when the income tax went in. Zakarian and I counted it up once. We wrote 98 editorials that year,
Right.
either advocating an income tax, or as we called it, tax reform,
Right.
with an income tax and other changes,
Right.
and with a spending cap. Either just advocating that, or talking about the budget, or saying don't pass that alternative budget that has a 10% sales tax. Don't do that, do this.
Right.
98 editorials on the same subject.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So it consumed your editorial output that year.
Well, it did.
Or subsumed.
Yeah. It's what a newspaper should do.
Right.
To
you
get
think
that-
it should dive right into the issue, take it on, and express a
Yeah.
drawing from the logic of the assembled opinion writers.
Well, I mean, there has to be an institutional opinion. It's usually
Right.
the product of, hopefully, the product of consensus on the editorial board. And if that's hard to reach, then the editorial page editor hopefully can come to a conclusion and sell it to the publisher, who's the final
Right.
authority on.
So it's interesting that the issues that seem to have resonated or drawn the most energy or from you are local issues. I mean,
well,
or regional.
They
issues.
mean the local or state. I mean,
Yeah.
they mean the most to the readers, because the readers are the closest to it. I mean, the
Right.
readers can, they have to live with the consequences.
Right.
If we were wrong in Lincoln about rerouting the Northeast Radial, then traffic's going to pile up and we'll be cursed into the
Right.
next century.
Right.
And we have been cursed on advocating an income tax in Connecticut.
Yeah.
So it's important, and your congressional delegation should know how you feel about the Afghanistan war and
Right.
whether the United States should apply pressure in the Middle East.
Right.
But it isn't bread and butter.
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to get. You might get more remote reaction, but not so much the energy. You're right. If you're tearing if you're putting a road through somebody's backyard,
Yeah.
it's about as emotional as it gets for people.
Yeah. But I've always felt that newspapers should weigh in on on the faraway stuff too, you know, because you do have members in Congress, and they can't just be down there without guidance, can they?
So you're a big proponent of an activist press.
I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. You've made a career
Yeah.
out of it, and you've done a great job. And
Yeah.
certainly, one last quick question before
Yeah.
we wrap for tonight. I always ask this question to folks. If you were to give advice to a young person growing up today, drawing on your years of experience, and what would that be? A soundbite version.
Well, who said it? Follow your bliss.
Okay.
I think Joseph Campbell did. But you really got to do what you love,
Okay.
and let the, you know, and don't worry about somebody who's doubled your salary right out of school.
Let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's about as sound bite as it gets. That's great. That's amazing. Okay. So.
Well, that was Joseph Campbell's line.
Oh
But,
yeah. No, but you know,
yeah.
you said it brilliant. You didn't blow it. Anyway, so our guest tonight, once again, is Bob Scherpf, who's shared some of his memories of town and his career and his life with us tonight. We thank you for joining us. Once again, this is Reflections on Granby. Today's date is August 13th, 2011. And my name is Mike Malloy. I've been your host, and we thank you for joining us. You can, once again, you can view this online on www.gctv16.org, which is our website, and copies of the shows are available, which is one of the few ways that we raise money here at the station. And we thank you once again for joining us tonight. Thank you.